The cantina on Nexus Prime Station was thick with smoke and the smell of different alien drinks. Commander Zexthal sat at a corner table, his forearms wrapped around a large glass of fermented kelp juice. His scales had lost their bright green color years ago, now faded to a dull gray that showed his age and the battles he had seen. 3 younger Cathari soldiers sat across from him. They had smooth, bright scales and eager eyes. They wanted to hear war stories from the old veteran. They had heard rumors about humans, but none of them had ever seen one in battle. "But tell us about the humans," said Veltara, the youngest of the 3. "The stories we hear cannot be true. They say humans make even the Draconian Empire nervous." Zexthal took a long drink and stared into the swirling liquid. His mind went back 15 cycles too, when everything changed, when the galaxy learned to fear the small pink creatures from the 3rd planet of an unremarkable star system. "I was young then, like you," Zexthal began. His voice was rough from years of shouting orders and breathing battle smoke. Young and stupid, and sure that the Cathari Empire was the strongest force in the galaxy. We had conquered 12 star systems. Ships were fast, our weapons were powerful, and our soldiers were trained from birth to fight. He paused and looked at each of the young soldiers. "Thought we knew everything about war. We were wrong." The story began 15 cycles ago when the Galactic Coalition detected a new species. They had just developed faster-than-light travel, which made them interesting but not dangerous. Most species took hundreds of years to build anything useful after their first warp jump. The new species called themselves humans, and they came from a small blue and green planet they called Earth. Intelligence reports said the humans had sent out several colony ships to nearby systems. One of these colonies was on a planet they named New Eden in the Kepler system. The planet was rich in rare minerals that the Cathari Empire needed for their ship engines. The reports made them sound harmless, Zexthal continued. About 50,000 colonists, simple farms, some research buildings, and a basic spaceport. Their technology looked like something from centuries ago. They used projectile weapons that fired metal slugs instead of energy weapons. Their ships were slow and clunky. Their defenses were almost non-existent. Admiral Krexfall, the fleet commander, saw an easy target. Ah! The plan was simple and had worked hundreds of times before. The Cathari fleet would arrive, demand surrender, take the valuable resources, and move the humans to a less useful planet. Most species agreed quickly when they saw Cathari warships. Zexthal had been a junior officer on the battlecruiser Voidrender. The ship was massive, over 2 kilometers long, with enough firepower to destroy a small moon. It traveled with 2 other battlecruisers and 6 smaller escort ships. The fleet carried 15,000 Cathari soldiers, all armed with the best weapons the Empire could make. When they arrived at the Kepler system, the human colony looked even more pathetic than the reports suggested. New Eden was a small settlement, spread across a river valley. The buildings were simple and made of local materials. The humans had clearly tried to work with the planet instead of changing it to fit their needs. "We scanned their defenses," Zexthal said, his voice getting quieter. "They had some basic shield generators, a few missile launchers, and what looked like modified farming equipment. Our weakest escort ship could have destroyed everything they had in minutes." Admiral Krex Volume sent the standard message. The humans had 1 local day to surrender, hand over their mining operations, and prepare for relocation. The message was polite, but firm. The Cathari Empire was offering them life in exchange for compliance. The response came 6 hours later. It was a simple message from someone called Lisa Grant, who seemed to be their colony leader. The message was even simpler than the Cathari demand. "We decline your generous offer. Please leave our system." The bridge of the Voidrender went silent. Zexthal remembered the shock on every face around him. In 300 years of expansion, no species had ever simply said no to the Cathari Empire. They might try to negotiate, offer alternative deals, or ask for more time. But a flat refusal was unthinkable. Admiral Krex Volume was insulted. These primitive creatures were refusing the mighty Cathari Empire. He decided to show them what they were dealing with. He ordered a single plasma bombardment of an empty field near their main settlement. The blast created a crater 50 meters wide and turned sand into glass. "We thought that would end it," Zexal said. "One demonstration of our power, and they would realize how hopeless their situation was." We waited for their surrender message. Instead, something else happened. Humans began moving. But they were not running to their ships to escape. They were not gathering in the main square to surrender. They were preparing to fight. The Cathari watched through their sensors as the human colony transformed. Children and elderly humans were moved to the safest buildings. Scientists and teachers picked up weapons and took positions along defensive lines. Farmers used their equipment to build barriers and dig trenches. Most shocking of all, they worked with a speed and efficiency that defied logic. Within 6 hours of the plasma bombardment, New Eden had changed from a peaceful farming community into a fortress. The humans had turned every building into a strong point, every street into a kill zone, and every piece of equipment into a weapon. We had seen other species prepare for war, Zexal told the young soldiers. It usually took days or weeks of panic and confusion. The humans did it in hours, and they did it like they had been planning for this moment since the day they arrived. Admiral Krexval was faced with a choice he had never encountered before. He could destroy the colony from orbit, but that would damage the valuable minerals they wanted to claim. He could withdraw and report that the humans were too dangerous to fight, but that would be humiliating. Or he could land troops and take the colony by force. The Admiral chose the third option. He was confident that primitive weapons could not stand against Cathari technology. He ordered a full assault for the next morning. "As I prepared my weapons and checked my armor that night," Zextal said, draining the last of his drink, "thought we were about to win the easiest battle of my career. I had no idea that I was about to learn why humans would become the most feared species in the galaxy." The three young soldiers leaned forward, eager to hear what came next. Stood up slowly, his old joints creaking. "That is enough for tonight," he said. "Come back tomorrow and I will tell you about the first engagement, about Jake Morrison and his farmers, about Beth Carter and her choice, about the day we learned that humans do not fight like any other species in the galaxy." He walked away, leaving the young soldiers with more questions than answers, in the beginning of an understanding that would change how they saw the universe. The next evening, the three young Cathari soldiers returned to the smoky cantina. They found Commander Zextal at the same corner table, staring at his drink like it held secrets from the past. His old eyes looked tired, but he nodded when he saw them approach. "You came back," he said without looking up. "Good, you need to hear this story. Every soldier in the galaxy should know what we learned that day." Veltara sat down first, followed by the other two. "What happened when you landed on their planet?" she asked. Zextal took a deep breath. "Your memories were still clear after all these years. Some things you never forget, no matter how much you want to." The assault began at dawn on the second day. Admiral Krexvalm deployed 3,000 of our best shock troops. We had energy shields that could stop any weapon these humans possessed. We had plasma rifles that could melt through steel. We had battle armor that made us nearly invincible. He paused and looked at each young face around the table. "We thought technology would be enough. We were wrong about that too." The Cathari plan was simple and proven. They would land in 4 locations around the human settlement and advance in standard formation. The humans would see the futility of resistance and surrender quickly. It had worked on every other primitive species. They had encountered Zexal's unit was assigned to capture the main agricultural complex on the eastern side of the colony. Intelligence reports said it was defended by civilian farmers with no military training. The area grew most of the food for the colony and housed the grain storage facilities. The commander of that sector was a human named Jake Morrison. Zextal said our intelligence said he had been an engineer in their military before becoming a farmer. We thought one old soldier with farming tools would be easy to handle. The Cathari transport ships landed just as the sun rose over New Eden. Doors opened and armored soldiers poured out, their energy shields glowing blue in the morning light. They advanced in perfect formation across the open fields toward the human settlement. At first, everything went according to plan. The humans opened fire with their primitive kinetic weapons, but the bullets bounced harmlessly off Cathari energy shields. The soldiers continued their steady advance, confident in their superior technology. Then Morrison and his people began to fight in ways that no military academy had ever taught. The first strange thing they did was destroy their own buildings, Zextal continued. Morrison had his people collapse a grain silo right in front of our main advance. The falling structure created a massive cloud of dust and blocked our direct path to the settlement. While the Kethari soldiers moved around the obstacle, the humans were already implementing their next surprise. Morrison had used his engineering knowledge to modify the irrigation system. As the alien troops entered the agricultural fields, hidden valves opened and flooded the entire area with knee-deep water. The Cathari energy shields were designed to stop projectiles and energy weapons. They were not designed to keep soldiers from sinking into muddy fields. The perfect formation became a struggling mess as armored troops fought to move through the flooded ground. That was when we realized these humans thought differently than any enemy we had faced, Zextal said. Most species try to preserve their infrastructure during a battle. They want something left to rebuild with. Morrison was using his own. Colony is a weapon against us. The real shock came when the Kethari reached the first defensive line. The humans had turned farming equipment into weapons in ways that defied all logic. Grain combines had been modified to launch metal projectiles. Irrigation pumps now sprayed burning fuel instead of water. Even simple farming tools had been weaponized. But what truly disturbed Zextal was not the improvised weapons. It was the way the humans fought. Other species fought to win with minimal losses. They retreated when positions became untenable. They surrendered when defeat was certain. The humans did none of these things. We surrounded a group of 20 human defenders at a small bridge over the irrigation canal, Zextal said, his voice getting quieter. They were cut off from the main force with no hope of rescue. Any rational species would have surrendered at that point. Instead, the humans held their position for 6 hours against 200 Cathari warriors. When their ammunition ran low, they fought with farming tools. When those broke, they used rocks and pieces of debris. When they had nothing left, they fought with their bare hands. The most disturbing moment came when Zextal's squad finally cornered 5 human defenders in a storage building. Standard military doctrine said that trapped enemies would surrender to save their lives. The Cathari had energy weapons trained on the humans from 3 directions. Escape was impossible. One of the defenders was a young woman named Beth Carter. Intelligence reports said she had been a botanist before the invasion, studying plant genetics in the colony's research facility. She looked small and fragile compared to the armored Cathari soldiers surrounding her. I expected her to drop her weapon and raise her hands, Zextal said. Instead, she looked directly at me and smiled. Then she activated an explosive device she had hidden in her equipment pack. The explosion killed Beth Carter instantly. It also killed 12 Cathari soldiers and wounded 15 more. The storage building collapsed, taking out a section of the defensive perimeter that the humans had been trying to breach for hours. A civilian scientist had turned herself into a weapon, Zextal continued. She chose death over surrender and took as many of us with her as possible. We had never encountered anything like it. The battle for the agricultural complex lasted 14 hours. The Cathari eventually captured their objective, but at a cost that shocked the entire command structure. They had lost nearly 800 soldiers to take a farming area that should have fallen within the first hour. Morrison and most of his defenders were dead. But they had held their position until the very end. Even when the situation was hopeless, even when they were completely outnumbered, they kept fighting. The worst part was realizing that this was just one sector, Zextal said. The other 3 assault groups reported similar casualties. Everywhere we attacked, the humans fought like they had nothing to lose and everything to gain. Admiral Krexvalium found himself in an impossible situation. He had successfully captured the human settlement, but at the cost of over 2,000 soldiers. The humans who remained alive had not surrendered. Instead, they had disappeared into buildings, tunnels, and hiding places throughout the colony. We thought we had one, Zextal said, finishing his drink. We controlled the main buildings and the spaceport. We had driven the humans from their defensive positions. According to every military manual in the Empire, the battle was over. He looked at the three young soldiers, all staring at him with wide eyes. We were wrong about that too. The humans were not finished fighting. They were just getting started. Valtora leaned forward. What do you mean? If you controlled the colony, how could they keep fighting? Zexal stood up slowly, the weight of old memories heavy on his shoulders. Tomorrow night I will tell you about Morrison's tunnels, about Tony Garcia and his technical skills, about how the humans turned our own technology against us, why holding ground means nothing when your enemy refuses to accept defeat. He walked away, leaving the young soldiers with the growing realization that everything they thought they knew about warfare was about to be challenged. The cantina was quieter than usual when the three young Cathari soldiers arrived for the third night. Commander Zexthal was already at his table, but this time he was not drinking. His four hands were folded in front of him, and his old eyes stared at nothing. The memories of what came next were darker than what he had already shared. You look troubled tonight, said Veltara, as she sat down. Zexthal nodded slowly.
Hey, Daide, what I told you yesterday was just the beginning. The real nightmare started after we thought we had one.
The other two soldiers took their seats, eager to hear more, but sensing the change in the old veteran's mood. There was something different about him tonight, a heaviness that had not been there before. After the first battle, we controlled the main settlement of New Eden. Zexel began. Our troops were stationed in every important building. We had secured the spaceport, the research facilities, and the administrative center. According to our military doctrine, the humans should have surrendered. He paused and looked at each young face. Instead, they did something that no other species had ever done. They vanished. The surviving humans had not fled to their ships or gathered in groups to surrender. They had simply disappeared into the colony they had built. There were humans everywhere. And the next day, the Cathari soldiers found themselves occupying empty buildings in a ghost town. At first we thought they had run away into the wilderness, Zexel continued. Our patrols searched the surrounding areas, but found nothing. Camps, no hiding places, no signs of where several thousand humans had gone. The truth was much worse than cowardice. Morrison had spent months before the invasion preparing for exactly this situation. Using his engineering knowledge, he had constructed a network of tunnels, hidden rooms, and supply caches throughout the entire colony. The humans had not fled, they had gone underground. The first sign of what was coming happened 3 days after our victory, Zexthal said. A patrol of 12 soldiers was walking through the market district when the ground exploded beneath them. 6 soldiers died instantly. The others were badly wounded. When reinforcements arrived, they found no trace of who had planted the explosive device. There were no footprints, no witnesses, no evidence of how the humans had known exactly when, and where the patrol would be walking. The second attack came that same night. A supply depot that had been secured just hours before was found completely empty in the morning. Weapons, ammunition, food supplies, and medical equipment had all vanished. Without anyone seeing or hearing anything, we increased security, posted more guards, and installed better sensors, Zexthal said. It did not matter. The humans always seemed to know where we were and what we were doing. The reason became clear when a Cathari communication technician named Krevik made a disturbing discovery. Someone had been accessing their secure radio channels. The humans were listening to every conversation, every order, and every plan the Cathari forces made. The person responsible was a human named Tony Garcia. Before the invasion, he had been a simple maintenance technician who repaired farming equipment and communication systems. But Garcia had been studying captured Cathari technology since the first day of the occupation. Garcia had figured out how to crack our encryption codes, Zexel said. A primitive maintenance worker had broken security systems that our best engineers claimed were impossible to hack. With access to Cathari communications, the humans always knew where patrols would be walking, when supply convoys would arrive, and where the weakest points in the occupation force were located. They used this information to strike with surgical precision, but the technical advantage was only part of what made the human resistance so terrifying. The real problem was how they thought about warfare itself. The Cathari had rules, traditions, and codes of honor that governed how battles were fought. The humans seemed to have no such limitations. They turned everything into a weapon. Food supplies were poisoned. Water systems were contaminated. Power generators were sabotaged to explode when activated. Even simple tools left behind were booby-trapped to injure anyone who touched them. The worst part was not knowing who was a threat, Zextal said. During the day, the colony looked peaceful. We saw no weapons, no soldiers, no signs of resistance. But at night, the humans emerged from their hiding places like spirits. The psychological warfare was even more disturbing than the physical attacks. The humans began leaving messages for individual Cathari soldiers, written in perfect Cathari script. The messages contained personal information that should have been impossible for them to know. Garcia had not only cracked their communication systems, he had also accessed their personnel files. The humans knew the names of Cathari family members back home. They knew about personal fears, medical conditions, and psychological weaknesses. They would leave a note on your bunk with your mother's name on it, Zextal said, his voice barely above a whisper. They would mention your brother who died in a training accident years ago. Things that no enemy should know. A human named Dan Cooper had been responsible for the psychological tactics. Before the invasion, he had been a psychology professor at the colony's small university. Cooper had spent months studying Cathari behavior, learning about their culture, and identifying what frightened them most. The humans used this knowledge to target specific cultural fears and superstitions. They left symbols that had religious significance to different Cathari clans. They manipulated lighting and sound to create effects that triggered deep psychological responses. Cooper turned our own minds against us, Zextal said. Soldiers, who had faced death in dozens of battles, became afraid to walk alone through the colony. Hardened veterans asked to be transferred to other assignments. The most chilling example of human adaptability came when they began predicting Cathari tactics. Every military organization develops patterns and standard procedures. The humans studied these patterns and learned to anticipate what their enemies would do next. When the Cathari changed their patrol routes, the humans were already waiting at the new locations. When security protocols were updated, the resistance adapted their methods within hours. When new equipment was brought in, the humans found ways to counter it almost immediately. It was like fighting an enemy that could see the future. Ixthel said every move we made, they had already prepared a response. Every plan we developed, they found a way to turn it against us. The situation became so bad that Admiral Krexavalium requested reinforcements from the Empire. He could not admit that. 50,000 primitive colonists had fought his forces to a standstill, so he claimed that the planet's strategic value required additional troops. 3 months after the initial invasion, 2 more battle cruisers arrived with 15,000 fresh soldiers. The Admiral announced that the human resistance would be crushed within days. He thought the reinforcements would end it, Zextal said. 30,000 Cathari soldiers against a few thousand humans hiding in tunnels? The mathematics seemed obvious. He stood up slowly, his old body creaking with the weight of memories and regret. We were wrong again. The humans had been preparing. For this moment, they knew we would bring reinforcements. They had been planning for it since the day we first arrived. Veltara looked confused. How could they prepare for something like that? They were just colonists. Zextal looked down at her with tired eyes. That is what we thought too. Come back tomorrow night, and I will tell you about the final battle. About Amy Carter and her sister's legacy. About how the humans turned their entire world into a weapon. About the day we learned that winning and surviving are not the same thing. He walked away, leaving the young soldiers with questions that would haunt their dreams and the growing understanding that humanity was unlike any enemy the galaxy had ever known. On the 4th night, Commander Zextal arrived at the cantina earlier than usual. The 3 young soldiers found him staring at an untouched glass of kelp juice, his weathered hands trembling slightly. When he looked up at them, his eyes held, a haunted expression that made them hesitate before sitting down. "This is the last part of the story," he said quietly. "After tonight, You will understand why veteran soldiers change the subject when someone mentions humans, entire fleets. Request transfers when they hear rumors of human colonies in their sector. The young Cathari took their seats slowly, sensing that whatever came next would change how they saw the universe forever. The second wave of reinforcements arrived with great fanfare. Zexel began. 15,000 fresh troops, the latest. Weapons and commanders who were certain they could succeed where we had failed. Admiral Kreck's volume announced that the human resistance would be crushed within 1 week. The new forces brought advanced sensor equipment to locate the hidden tunnels, heavy weapons to destroy underground strongholds, and psychological warfare specialists to counter the human mind games. Every lesson learned from 3 months of fighting was incorporated into the new strategy. We thought we had learned everything there was to know about fighting humans, Zextal said. We were wrong one final time. The humans had indeed been preparing for this moment, but not in ways that Cathari could have imagined. Morrison, Garcia Cooper, Dodge, and the other resistance leaders had spent months studying not just their immediate enemies, but the entire Cathari military doctrine. They had learned that the Empire always sent reinforcements when initial invasions stalled. They had studied the patterns of how those reinforcements were deployed. Most importantly, they had used their 3 months of underground warfare to prepare surprises that would horrify military strategists across the galaxy. The final battle began at dawn on a day the humans had chosen carefully. Amy Carter, the sister of Beth Carter, who had died in the first engagement, had taken over coordination of the colony's defense. She had been a meteorologist before the invasion, studying weather patterns and atmospheric conditions. Amy Carter had turned her knowledge of weather into a weapon, Zextal said. She had been tracking seasonal wind patterns and temperature changes for months, waiting for the perfect conditions. When the Cathari launched their final assault, Carter activated a plan that demonstrated the terrifying extent of human preparation. Using Garcia's technical skills and Morrison's engineering knowledge, humans had modified their atmospheric processors and weather control systems. The attack began with what appeared to be a natural sandstorm. The Cathari sensors showed normal weather patterns, just an unfortunate coincidence that would slow their advance. Within minutes, however, the storm intensified beyond anything in the planet's recorded history. The winds reached speeds that should have been impossible for that planet, Zextal continued. Our transport ships were grounded. Our communications were disrupted. Our soldiers could barely see 3 meters in front of them. But the storm was only the beginning. As the Cathari forces struggled through the artificial weather, the humans activated the second phase of their plan. Morrison had spent months secretly modifying the colony's mining operations, turning excavation charges into seismic weapons. The ground beneath the advancing Cathari troops began to shake and crack. Controlled earthquakes opened chasms that swallowed entire units. Underground explosions collapsed tunnels that the aliens did not even know existed, creating sinkholes that trapped vehicles and soldiers. They had weaponized their entire planet, Zextal said, his voice filled with a mixture of admiration and terror. The very ground we walked on had become our enemy. The most disturbing aspect of the final battle was how the humans had anticipated every Cathari response. When the alien forces took shelter in buildings, they discovered that the structures had been rigged with explosives. When they tried to establish communication posts, they found that their equipment had been sabotaged weeks in advance. Dan? Cooper had spent the 3 months of occupation studying individual Cathari officers and soldiers. He had identified their personalities, their decision-making patterns, and their psychological weaknesses. When the final battle began, the humans seemed to know exactly what each enemy commander would do before they did it. Cooper had left personal messages for our officers, Zexel said. Not threats or propaganda, but detailed analyses of their tactical preferences and psychological profiles. He told Colonel Vexstar that he would retreat to the northern hills. When faced with seismic weapons, he told Major Kraloth that she would try to establish a command post in the old research building. The messages were found exactly where Cooper had predicted each officer would go. They were written in perfect Cathari military terminology and included suggestions for better tactical decisions. The psychological impact was devastating, Amy. Carter had also prepared a final message that was broadcast on all Cathari. communication frequencies during the height of the battle. Her words became legendary throughout the galaxy, quoted in military academies and whispered in soldiers' barracks across dozens of star systems. She said that her sister Beth had died too by time for the colony's real preparations, Zexthal recounted. That every human who had fallen in the previous 3 months had done so knowing that their sacrifice would make the final battle possible. She thanked us for teaching them how to fight and promised that other human colonies would learn from their example. The siege of New Eden lasted 8 months in total. When it finally ended, it was not because the humans had been defeated. Admiral Krexvallen received orders from the Empire to withdraw all forces immediately. The cost of taking one human colony had become too high to justify. We lost more soldiers fighting 50,000 human colonists than we had lost in the previous decade of expansion campaigns, Zexthal said. The Empire decided that New Eden was not worth the price we were paying. But the real impact came after the withdrawal. News of the human resistance spread throughout the galaxy faster than the Cathari Empire could suppress it. Other species began asking uncomfortable questions about their own relationships with the major powers. The humans had proven something that changed everything, Zaxiel continued. They showed that superior technology and numbers were not enough. If your enemy was willing to pay any price for victory, within 5 years, human colonies began appearing in sectors that had once belonged to established empires. But these were not the primitive settlements that the Cathari had first encountered. The humans had learned from New Eden's experience and shared those lessons with every new colony they established. I served in 3 more campaigns against human settlements, Zexthal said. Each time, they were more prepared, more innovative, more terrifying. They had studied our tactics, learned our weaknesses, and developed countermeasures for everything we could throw at them. Human military doctrine evolved at a speed that defied galactic norms. While other species took generations to develop new strategies, humans adapted their methods within months or even weeks. Every defeat became a lesson, every casualty a teacher for the next engagement. The final irony, Zexthal said, standing up slowly from his chair, is that we created our own worst enemy. Every battle we fought against them made them stronger. Every tactic we used against them was studied, understood, and turned back against us. He looked at the 3 young soldiers, who sat in stunned silence around the table. Now, 15 cycles later, human patrol ships guard systems that once belonged to empires. They did not conquer us through superior technology or overwhelming numbers. They conquered us by being willing to pay prices that no rational species would accept, and by turning every defeat into preparation for the next victory. Zexthal picked up his untouched drink and poured it onto the floor of the cantina. That is why the galaxy fears humans. It's not because they are the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced. We fear them because they never give up. They learn from everything, and they remember every lesson we teach them. The old veteran walked away, leaving the young soldiers in silence. Around them, the cantina continued its usual noise and activity, but the 3 Cathari sat motionless. Finally understanding why experienced warriors spoke of humans in whispers, and why entire military units requested transfers to safer sectors of the galaxy. The legend of New Eden had become the foundation of human reputation throughout the stars. And every species that heard the story learned the same lesson. Never underestimate the creatures from the small blue planet who refuse to accept defeat.